So moved by Senator McBroom. Hearing no objections, the minutes will be adopted. I know Senator Geis has experienced a little bit of a delay. She'll be here with us shortly, so I don't believe we have to excuse absent members, but I do want to get the hearing started. We do have a number of people here to testify, and I appreciate their attendance and willingness to do so. As we know, we've had a very interesting start of the year. And as we take a look at governance, whether that's here in our Oversight Committee or in our roles as state senators, I know that we all agree that good governance is what sort of binds us together. I've had the opportunity to live different sets of roles, as many of us have before we get to the Senate. I had an opportunity once to run a statewide nonprofit association, and we focused a lot on helping other charities and township level or the city level. And obviously many of our great organizations that are in our communities are receiving federal grants, sometimes directly from the federal government, but oftentimes through state government with the access that the dollars that had come from the federal government. And so to me, that's an integral part of the fabric of our communities. It's an integral part of what makes our state great. And all states do this. So we're not unique to having significant federal dollars funding our state government or our local governments, or funding nonprofit organizations and other groups to do good work on behalf of our citizens. For many years, Michigan has been what would be called a donor state. We send more taxes out to Washington, D.C. than sometimes we receive. And that is something that we know happens on a basis, not every year, but many years. And for us, I want to make sure that we see those dollars, as much of those dollars coming back to our state and effectively being used here in the state. As we know, earlier this year, the Trump administration sent out an executive directive that put a funding freeze in. After that initial memo was distributed, the next day, the Office of Management and Budget submitted a notice rescinding it. However, at the same time, the White House press secretary then stated the rescinding memo did not, in fact, rescind the freeze. And so there was a lot of confusion in that period of time because these were dollars that were sent to our state. They were approved by Congress. They were approved by a variety of different funding mechanisms, and they were now being freezed without much guidance from the federal government. Obviously, from there, a number of attorney generals, including our own, petitioned federal government, federal judges, and there's been a temporary restraining order since the days following that. On February 10th, federal government, federal judges, and there's been a temporary restraining order since the days following that. On February 10th, another judge agreed to continue that order, And we have seen additional cases in front of federal judges that have federal dollars and resources here in the state. And so we'll have a number of people that will come forward to speak today. So I just want to thank everybody for the opportunity for this dialogue. And I'll bring up our first testifier, Philip Berquist from the Michigan Primary Care Association. And if, Philip, you'd like to bring Deb Brinson and Megan Erskine, you can do that as well.
Good morning. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to keep my remarks pretty short so you can hear more from these two folks that are leading health centers in different parts of Michigan. But quickly, we'll introduce the Michigan Primary Care Association. We've got the pleasure of serving as the voice for 48 health center organizations across the state, all of Michigan's federally qualified health centers, many of our tribal health centers, urban Indian health programs, and several community-based healthcare providers. Just a sense of scale, we operate over 400 locations across the state of Michigan and serve 1 in 14 people in some form of primary care, behavioral health, substance use, and oral health services. On January 28th, which is technically the day before that memo came out, I will always remember the first time I saw it. It was leaked a little early, the day before it was implemented. But on January 28th and in the days following, every Michigan health center, like many community organizations, were impacted by the announcement of a federal funding pause. Through most of that day, we had a lot of confusion about what that pause meant. In the days following, most organizations were really facing significant uncertainty about a critical part of their resources. Health centers are funded in lots of ways, but federal resources are one of the most consistent places that they're funded, and also an area that's really important to paying for health center workforce, the folks that provide care day to day. While the federal funding pause did get officially rescinded not long after it was put in place, it wound up taking over a week for the federal payment management system to catch back up or restore to more usual operations, and most health centers to begin receiving access to federal funds again. But for some health center organizations, it took 2 weeks to regain access to federal exacerbated an already difficult situation. So with that introduction, I want to turn things over to Deb and then to Megan to talk a little bit about what it looked like for their health centers.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank you for the opportunity to come in and share kind of a disheartening situation, which I think is really important to understand from that perspective. I'm Debbie Brinson. I'm the CEO of Honor Community Health Center, which is located in Pontiac, Michigan. We serve Pontiac and the greater area there. We are also important to note that we also are the first FQHC in the state of Michigan to run a residency-based training program for family physicians, which is really important. It's important to know that we employ 180 people and 18 family medicine residents. We have 11 primary care sites, 9 school-based health centers, and 1 dental clinic. We serve more than 30,000 individuals each year and have more than 90,000 visits coming into our center each year in those areas alone. My organization is a nonprofit, and there are 3 primary ways in which it gets funded. The first is from revenue from Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement, and then from state and federal grants. Those grants include from HHS, they include from Ryan White, Title X, SUD, CMH funds. As you can hear, these funds are our lifeline to our ongoing operations and to the delivery of care in our community. Equally important, they're the lifeline to employees' paychecks coming in, 180 of them coming in. I think it's important to share my age, because I would bet that I'm probably one of the oldest people in this room that's worked with HHS. I've worked for more than 30 years in the health and human services field, either through local, state, government, and or to the most recent in the last 15 years as a nonprofit. And during that entire time, I've worked with HHS in some kind of capacity. Go into the payment management system and make a request to draw down. There are very stringent requirements being able to go in and make a payment. You can't do 3 days beforehand. That money's got to be expended out either 3 days before or 3 days after. So most of us in the FQHC world use that payment system to make payroll. It's very clearly defined. And we have outside auditors that come in and take a look, are we meeting those stringent requirements? Pieces. So for that first week, first time ever, have I tapped into my reserves, which I'm grateful for having, and being able to make that payroll. So I tapped into reserves twice in that down period without having any clear understanding of what was happening on that piece of it. Systems up, am I still concerned? And I want to share with you yes, and let me share with you why on that. We still have not received approval of a $600,000 carryover that must go into this budget. We still not have received that approval from HHS. And other times, we would have received that payment approval within 4 weeks period. It's still 6 weeks out. We've not heard, and we've not heard any indication from the help desk because there's no help desk for us to check in with. While we're getting the payments, the algorithm is different. So when we went in to make a payment request for the payroll that we missed and then had to make a payment request for the payroll that we needed to, it stopped. It said we have to go through multiple levels of approval. So we did that being a good faith partner in this. We understand the complexities of any structural situation, but that still continues to this day. It required us to tap into reserves. And why that's really important as a nonprofit, I keep a certain amount of operating reserves on hand. Those reserves are going to change dramatically because we know that there are additional changes coming about. And I, as a leader, must be prepared. That is what the board expects. for me is to take a look and to put the organization to make sure that it's on good standing. Those reserves are very important to us. If field staff tell you that you will not have a job. But right now you have a job, and I get paid to make sure that you have a job so you can deliver services on that. First interview question coming in is, are you grant funded? Yes, we're grant funded. What does that mean on that? That is the first thing that applicants are asking coming into the place. We're already stretched for frontline and MA staff on that. This did not help the situation. And finally, I said, Mom, part of what I'm struggling with is there's a yellow line that goes down the road. And we all agree to abide by that yellow line driving down the road, that this group will stay on this side and this group will stay on that. There's no magic buzzer that says when you cross over, you're going to get in trouble. There's an agreement between us. And that's exactly the same thing with the infrastructure. My agreement with you as elected officials, my agreement with those administrators with HHS, that if I receive this money, that there's an agreement I'm going to use that money appropriately. And on the other side of that line, that HHS or others will also follow that same agreement. Otherwise, I can't do predictable problem solving. I can't deliver care on that. When we go over that line, who brings us back? In the local community, it's the police department, it's somebody tooting their horn saying, get over on the other side. But still, there is this basic premise that we will all agree to how to operate. And that has changed for me. I've never encountered a situation like this where that's changed, where I have to be predictable. I don't have a way to be predictable anymore, nor does my board have a way to hold me accountable for being predictable. Long-term impact, there will be long-term impacts on it. I am seriously looking at consolidating sites. I don't have a choice. There are lots more changes coming in, and my board expects that from me on that. I'll be using more reserves, and I'll be going out for more grant requirement pieces with that, which every other group will be doing. But structurally, we have to figure out how this is going to change, because we play a really important role in the delivery of care. My final comments to you are, I'm a nonprofit, and I'm really proud to work in a nonprofit. I'm an integral part of the system of care, integral part. If I were to be removed from that integral part, it will have a major, major profound impact on hospitals, on local law enforcement, on communities because of that. But you have to understand, as a nonprofit, my margin is less than 3%, less than 3%. And most of my money goes out into delivery of personnel costs in order to deliver care to individuals. That's an important piece of this. I don't have deep bench. I don't have deep resources. And so when those are hit, it takes a major, profound impact on us. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
We've been growing a lot. In 2021, we had 1,000 patients, and at the end of 2024, we had 6,000 patients, but we're still fairly small, which allows us to be nimble and agile and innovative, which is what I want to talk about today. Catherine's provides care to all community members, all low-income community members, but something that we're really proud of and that we're specializing in is healthcare for the homeless. And the way that we do that right now is we go into 3 different shelters in Kent County. We go into churches. We're doing place-based care out of encampments with our street medicine program. Over 30% of our patients are homeless, even though that definition for us is fairly broad. Our Healthcare for the Homeless program exemplifies what we believe at Catherine's, that healthcare is a human right, but we've also had an integral part in decreasing overall healthcare costs in Kent County. I want to talk about one of those projects today. We have an innovative partnership with the women's shelter in Dégagé. Dégagé was able to offer housing to 24 chronically homeless women with very severe mental health and physical health issues. These women have been in and out of shelters and hospitals taxpayer dollars, overall healthcare costs, and just the quality of life for these women. I don't bring this up to brag, but maybe I'm bragging a little bit. But this unique program relates to 2 of our new federal grants that we received in 2024. We were very lucky and fortunate to receive 2 grants from HRSA. One grant would allow us to hire a full-time street medicine team and a van to go into more shelters, do full-time care, go into homeless encampments. And what we're most excited about, the second grant would allow us to hire a full-time medical, dental, and behavioral health team in the largest shelter in Meltrotter in Kent County. Currently, the way that we're doing healthcare for the homeless, I'm pulling other providers from my community clinics, and we're doing some hours there and some hours over there, and it's been really great, but it's patchwork. These 2 grants would absolutely escalate and scale up the work that we're doing in a way that would transform our community. But because of the federal funding freeze, we're taking a much more conservative approach to that funding. While we are still committed to healthcare for the homeless, and we are still committed to meeting it's a disgrace, and it's sad, and it's a tragedy for our community, because we've already talked to partners about the work and this vision, and people were very excited and looking forward to what we were going to be able to offer. And now we are taking a risk-averse approach. We are shrinking, we are not growing, we are not transforming. We also have a base grant as well, and I won't go into or repeat what Deb said, but I do just want to echo the workforce concerns in general. I've spent the last 6 weeks meeting with staff who are concerned about their jobs. I've lost 2 candidates for medical providers that found out that we are federally funded and declined jobs. It is already really hard to get people to work in an FQHC because it's really hard work. It's mission-oriented work, but it's really, really hard work. I had to go and spend a lot of time securing a line of credit at a bank because we also used the grant to make payroll. We were lucky that the federal grant eventually came down, but just a lot of my time in the last 6 weeks and a lot of leadership's time has not been spent on core mission or being efficient or effective. We spent a lot of time in meetings with elected officials, which we love to do, our staff, our community members, our board, our partners, and it's all figuring out contingency planning. I think it's heartbreaking. I think FQHCs are one of the most spectacular nonprofit models in the United States of America. I'm proud to work at an FQHC. I'm proud to work in an FQHC in Michigan, and it breaks my heart that we are shrinking and we are not growing and we are not moving towards progress. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. I just want to state for the record, because I think this is, all right, I got too aggressive. I think there is a misunderstanding about federal dollars, that somehow it's a handout or It's putting our state in debt. To be very clear, and the chair alluded to this, these are our tax dollars that we pay to the federal government that then come back into our state to serve the people of Michigan. I had an opportunity to spend some time at Advantage Health in Detroit, our FQHC in our area, and I'm glad you brought up how you interface with hospitals or other community organizations. I had a coffee hour just this last week, and a woman attended who works for a clinic who said, you know, beyond the uncertainty of the funding, she called over to the VA, as she often does, because there are people who get service from multiple organizations and couldn't get a call back. That people had been let go, people had been fired, that the people who still were there weren't sure what they were able to do anymore. So I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit more about how you interface with other community organizations, and particularly interfacing with hospitals, because without FQHCs, many of these patients end up in the emergency room, correct? When you're waiting, not preventative care, it's waiting until a situation gets so bad that you're in the ER. And I know we've had conversations in the last committee here about bringing costs down for the rest of us. Hospital visits are incredibly expensive, and that cost is passed on to the rest of us. So I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about how you interface with other organizations, and not that I want to ask you to go to worst case scenario, but what happens if you close?
So for us, we have a really strong partnership with all the hospitals in Oakland County, particularly in Pontiac. So if we were to close, the first thing that would happen is those patients would end up two places, one in the emergency room or in jail. We just did a joint initiative to open up 7 days a week, 12 hours a day with our local county health department and with Trinity. To be able to see as the first stop for individuals coming in before they end up in the emergency room, or for a location for the police department to bring in an individual. So for us, it's huge. The cost, I think, there's a lot of cost studies out there that would show the impact on that. But beyond that, it's the primary care and the loss of lives, quite frankly. I mean, I think looking at what happened during COVID, FQHC stayed open when many primary care docs' offices stayed and the hospitals were about all of these systems is when we come together and we work on a system of care piece. That's how you reduce down costs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Brinson, did you say there was no help desk at HHS?
So there are opportunities, and I'll let Philip address this more, but there are help desks within each of the systems within HHS. So the payment management system has one.
I guess let me rephrase.
Okay.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but we have lots of people. So did the service that you were used to having from these help desks take a nosedive after the announcement? I guess that's yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for coming in and talking today. A lot of what you've shared is impactful. I want to focus in on, and for anyone else who's going to testify, I may ask the same question, so you can feel free to include it in your testimony, but top line, so we can understand this, from when the funding freeze happened till today, how many federal dollars that you're entitled to have been kept from you?
Yeah, good.
I don't think in our membership we've had any federal dollars completely withheld. What we have seen is the ability to access those federal dollars operate on a very different kind of time frame. So very quick, normally to access a federal grant, you submit what's called a drawdown request. So you say to the HHS payment management system, I would like to take this amount of money that I've been awarded, or from the amount I've been awarded, and We are still waiting on some to be approved, but we haven't had any be declined, if that helps.
So I do want to clarify, we do have a request in that's been in for 6 weeks to do our carryover, which is less than 600,000, and we still have not received that approval.
And it is unfortunately far from the only one that is still in that pending. Hasn't been declined, but it is out there.
Is it on? Okay. Are you ready? Okay. Good morning, Chair Singh and members of the Senate Oversight Committee. Thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to speak today. My name is Shanda Hillman. I am CEO and Executive Director at Flowers Early Learning, which is a Head Start program that serves Berrien, Cass, and Van Buren counties. And I'm not only the CEO of Flowers Early Learning, formerly Tri-County Head Start, but also a former Head Start parent. Today, I'm not just speaking as a leader of my organization, but I'm speaking as a mother who has experienced firsthand the life-changing impact of this program. Head Start serves 28,000 On the morning of January 28th, I was sitting at a National Head Start Association conference in Washington, D.C., surrounded by 600 Head Start professionals when we collectively realized that we were locked out of the payment management system. My phone buzzed with panicked calls from my CFO. 94% of our funding comes from those federal dollars. By 11 a.m., I was on an emergency call with my HR director, CFO, attorney, and board chair. By 2 p.m., we had no choice. Without access to our funding and without knowledge of when we would get funding, we were unable to keep for her child, for her college classes, and the fragile balance that keeps her family moving forward. Thankfully, we regained access to our funds and we were able to reopen, but the terror of that moment has not left us. And even after January 28th, for us, the crisis wasn't over. Our fiscal year 25 funds had not yet arrived and were later than usual. Our organization is a February 1st Head Start grantee, which means our funding cycle starts anew on that date each year. Federal regulations prevent us from spending prior year funds in the new grant year, leaving us in a precarious position as we waited for our next round of funding to arrive. As February began, we only had assurances that our fiscal year 25 funds were coming, but you can't pay staff with assurances. We watched our bills pile up, calling vendors and asking for understanding as we awaited our funding. By Wednesday, February 5th, we had to make a hard decision. If our funds did not arrive by Friday morning, we would have no choice but to shut down. Then, on the morning of Thursday, February 6th, we woke up to an even bigger issue. Not only was the payment management services system down again, but so was HeadStart.gov and the Administration for Children and Families website. The uncertainty was crushing. Finally, around noon that day, our notice of award arrived for our fiscal year 25 funds, and on Friday, February 7th, the funds were deposited into our account, just in the nick of time. This is not how early childhood education should operate. At Flowers Early Learning, we serve families prenatally and children from birth to age 4. And we've heard it said that families would be just fine without Head Start, that they could simply enroll in GSRP. But let me be clear, while GSRP, the state-funded pre-K program, is fresh local produce and teaching families how to cook with it, teaching families the importance of mealtime and how to make it work with limited schedules and even more limited budgets. It's health screenings that catch vision problems before a child ever sets foot in kindergarten. It's mental health professionals who sit with a family the day after a domestic violence tragedy, helping them pick up the pieces. It's family service workers who step in after a house fire, ensuring children have everything they need so they don't miss a single day of school and can have some sort of normal in their suddenly chaotic life. And sometimes it's as simple as a little boy setting his blue shoes and oversized backpack onto the steps of a Head Start bus for the very first time, just like my son did 10 years ago. That moment changed the course of my family's future. Because of Head Start, I am sitting before you here today. In our 3 counties alone, we have served over 40,000 children. If funding goes away, 583 children will lose their early education opportunities. 200 staff members will lose their job, and entire communities will feel the ripple effect. This isn't just a funding issue, it's a workforce issue, a public health issue, and a future of Michigan issue. I know the fate of Head Start does not rest in your hands, but I am asking you to do everything in your power to protect and advocate, because for thousands of children in Michigan, Head Start isn't just a preschool, it's the first step towards a future they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Senator McMorrow.
I'll keep it quick, and hopefully there's no extra noise here. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate that you brought up the fact that GSRP is not a replacement for Head Start, and I think for those who are not in need of these services, it may be hard to parse the differences. You spoke to being a Head Start parent, so I'm wondering if you can just detail a little bit about your background and what Head Start and access to Head Start allowed you to do as a family.
Thank you. My family, we qualified for Head Start based on income, so that means our family was below 100% of poverty. My son started in our Head Start program in our Goebbels classroom. The next year, my other son also continued after him. While my children were in Head Start, it allowed me to go back to school. I was able It's a group of parents elected to serve next to the board, so everything goes through Policy Council before it makes it to the board. So I served on Policy Council. I was elected Policy Council Chair. And then in February of 2016, I was hired as a part-time recruiter in the program and moved up quickly through, I think, 5 or 6 different positions until 18 months later, I landed as CEO and executive director of the organization. So I can't even begin to count the number of things that Head Start has done for my life. Just the information about child development, the resources that they helped provide us were incredible. And truly, without Head Start, I wouldn't be here today.
Thank you for being here today. Appreciate your testimony. Next, we'll have Madonna Princer from Kent County, and I believe Madonna's on Zoom.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me here today and giving me some time before your committee. I am the executive director at Head Start for Kent County. I have been in Kent County for just over 10 years and was with another Head Start program in the mid-Michigan area for 15 years. Our program operates 13 different sites throughout Kent County, and We serve 1,020 preschoolers, which 60% of them are 4-year-olds, and we do have a partnership with the ISD and do blended funding with the state pre-K for those 4-year-olds. In addition, we have 105 infant and toddlers in our center-based early Head Start model, 90 prenatal moms, infants, and toddlers in our home-based early Head Start model. And through all that, we employ just over 400 staff, which many of them are current and former Head Start parents. My colleague did a great job of giving you an overview of the Head Start program, so I will skip a little bit to just sort of the impacts we felt with the pause. So we were one of 61 the country and 9 in the state that had their funding delayed after the federal freeze. Our funding was one of those that was delayed for almost 2 weeks before we had access to it. It didn't seem that there was necessarily a rhyme or reason as to why some programs had the ability to draw down right away after it was rescinded versus others like myself who continued to face those challenges. The only reason that we were able to continue operating while the delay was occurring was simply a matter of timing. The week of the pause was an accounts payable week for us, so where we paid our bills versus a payroll week, and we do those on alternating weeks. The fact that it occurred on a Tuesday was also a timing issue because we don't send out payments or anything like that until the end. In addition, going back to the timing, we had just received our December reimbursement from the ISD for our state pre-K funds. And so with those two things, it allowed us to have enough funds in our account for the payroll the following week. And then our funding delays were resolved the Monday after the payroll, so therefore we didn't have that delay. If this had been a week earlier or a week later, we would have been in a very similar situation to Flowers' program because we would not have had those funds accessible to us in our account. The payment management system process has always been something that just takes the 24 hours for it to draw down. So it was unprecedented and definitely left us with much uncertainty about what to do next. It was already mentioned to you that there's this 3-day rule about how we draw down money. It's enough for 3 days worth. That's part of our grant requirement. It's something that we agree to. It, though, has caused us to start thinking about how we do things in relation to that. Before our process was, we started going through the payroll process like on Monday and Tuesday of that week. We would know our total. We would draw down late Tuesday or first thing Wednesday morning so that the funds were in our account by Wednesday or Thursday. And then obviously payroll is paid out on Friday. However, because we don't know what we don't know and what might happen next, we've adjusted our processes to use the information that we know about past history of our payroll or our accounts payable and to draw down on Friday so that the money would be there on Monday as we process. Because if there were a delay, at least that is giving us up to 5 business days to begin to problem solve versus having perhaps only 24 hours to problem solve. Since we were able to remain open, our parents did not feel the struggles, but I can't say the same for my staff. Even though they did not experience any loss of wages, it created uncertainty and worry. I had many transparent conversations with my staff over those 2 weeks and even since, along with my leadership team and community partners to talk about contingency plans. And I assured my staff that I could not in good conscience ask them to come to work if I did not have a plan to pay them. I do worry about the impact that it will have still on hiring. The early childhood field is already an area that lacks staffing and qualified individuals. And we too had questions as we were completing interviews during this process, just after this process, about our funding. And although we haven't had anybody specifically tell us, we've had people decline positions that were offered to them. And I certainly understand that it could have something to do with the uncertainty of the funding. Some potential issues that I worry about that could be on the horizon for us has to do with the upcoming carryover request that we'll be placing. I know that was already mentioned to you that somebody else was already waiting, or many are waiting. We have funds that were part of our 2024 funds that was to put in playgrounds at some of our buildings that we just opened infant toddler classrooms this past year. And due to the timing of receiving those in the approaching Michigan winter, we have to have those installed in the spring. So we will have to put in that request here this month for that. And we're concerned at the amount of time that may take for those to come in, and or whether or not it won't, it'll just be declined. And perhaps those funds will be recaptured. Also, right now, as we're sitting with a continuing resolution that's about to expire next week on the federal budget, that creates uncertainty. If there's a government shutdown, how might that impact our ability to draw down the funds through the payment management system? In the past, it has not, as we've had a few in my career, but with what happened at the end of January, I think we all feel uncertain on whether or not the payment management system will still be operational. The other issue that we face, being under the continuing resolution, and we are a January 1 grantee, so only 50% of our grant is placed in the payment management system as long as there's a continuing resolution. And then once a budget's finalized, they place the remaining 50% in payment management for us to access. And we're concerned about the timing of that, since we are concerned about the timing of when a budget might be passed. And our grant isn't one that's spent equally over months or even equally in the first 6 months, as there are more school days between January and June than there are between July and December. And we also have greater expenses in January, as most of the classroom space that we lease are annual bills that are paid out in January. So if we don't see the balance of our grant deposited by early to mid-May, we have the potential to run out of funds. To their healthcare needs. And in addition to the educational needs that we provide for children, we also provide them with 2/3 of their daily nutrition. So this would be devastating to the 1,200 families that we serve and my 400 staff that would find themselves in a position that is not a position they found themselves in working for a program like ours. Thank you so much for your time today and allowing me to share a little bit about the impact that this has had on our program in Kent County.
Great, thank you very much. Not seeing any questions, I'll move on to the next people to testify. We'll bring up Dr. Deanne Keller and Olivia Ponte from Michigan Department of Education.
Good morning, Senators. My name is Olivia Ponte, and I am the Legislative Liaison for the Michigan Department of Education, and I am just here to introduce my colleague, Dr. Deanne Kelleher.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Chair Singh, Majority Vice Chair McMorrow, Minority Vice Chair McBroom, and members of the committee. Thank you very much for your invitation to speak today. My name is Dr. Deanne Kelleher. I'm a registered dietitian and the director of the Office of Nutrition Services at the Michigan Department of Education. The Office of Nutrition Services is responsible for nutrition security programs for Michiganders across the lifespan, from infants to older adults. Our office supports a broad range of federal and state nutrition programs and grants, including nutritious meals and snacks for children and older adults in care settings, snacks and suppers in after-school programs, school breakfasts and lunches, summer meals, and farm-to-program grants connecting food from local farmers to schools, child care centers, food banks, and community action agencies. Our office receives approximately $900 million in federal funds and over $200 million in state funding for our programs. I'm here today to talk specifically about the federal funding freeze on our local food purchasing agreement, which we call LFPA, and the grants for local foods for schools and childcare, known as LFSCC. These grants are used to support local, regional, and underserved producers, farmers, to improve and maintain how farmers can connect their food to the community. The Michigan Department of Education receives these funds from the United States Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Marketing Service, AMS. And in turn, we partner with food banks and community action organizations to reach underserved communities with the goal of improving food security. The LFPA and LFSCC grants are multi-year grants. Michigan is currently allocated to receive a little over $11 million in our LFPA funds, and we have nearly $30 million in LFPA and LFSCC funds that have been awarded to Michigan to grow these programs over the next 3 years. These programs are vital for Michigan citizens. They support small, local farmers and historically underserved farmers and connect them in getting their wholesome products to those Michiganders most in needs, including children, older adults, and those of low income. These are served from the programs through healthcare organizations, tribal organizations, food banks, community action agencies, regional food collectives, and mobile pantries. There are numerous success stories from this grant all over Michigan, and our state serves as a model all across the United States for how these programs and grants work. The LFPA funds are available to Michigan Department of Education on a reimbursement basis. Our partners will purchase food from their local farmers to use in their programs, and they submit invoices to our office. In turn, the Office of Nutrition Services makes a reimbursement request to the federal government to draw down funds to reimburse these partners. Our office first Federal staff from AMS did not attend when we sent virtual meeting requests. On February 21st of this year, our office submitted a reimbursement claim for our LFPA funds and received a notification of denial for any invoices dated after January 19th of this year. We have been in contact with the Michigan Attorney General's office regarding this freeze in our federal funds. After numerous attempts, I did receive a phone call from the USDA on last Wednesday, February 26th, that acknowledged that invoices prior to January 19th would be paid, but nothing after January 20th at this point. We were just asked to be patient while they await the review of grants. These funds support our economy. They support our farmers. They support the health and well-being of our Michigan citizens. Thank you for your time.
I do have a quick question.
Sure.
How much was the invoice that was submitted that was declined?
We had a $1.7 million invoice that was declined.
And if I understand correctly, this was stuff that has already been purchased at the local level that is not being reimbursed to those local farmers and community food banks and so forth.
So the community food banks, so our partners like the Food Bank Council of Michigan, Kalamazoo Valley Food Hub, they purchase from the farmers, and so they've purchased it. So we're waiting to reimburse our partners, such as Food Bank Council of Michigan.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Okay. Thank you very
Thank
much
you
for
very
being
much.
here today. Next up, I'll invite Terry Langley from the Disability Network.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to explain a little bit about what Disability Network Michigan is and who we represent and the services that we provide in all of your communities. Again, my name is Terry Langley, and I serve as the Executive Director for Disability Network Michigan. Disability Network Michigan represents the state's 15 centers for independent living and serves as their collective voice. The CILs serve and support individuals with disabilities in all 83 counties in this state, from Monroe County in the southeast corner to across the Mackinac Bridge and all the way to the Kenowa County in the northwest corner of the state. CILs provide services and support for anyone with cognitive and/or physical disabilities of any age. According to the Centers for Disease Control, there are about 2.1 million adults in Michigan who live with a disability. That's about 1 in 4 adults. The total number of individuals with disabilities in our state is actually much higher when you include the number of children who have disabilities. Centers for Independent Living are created under the Federal Rehabilitation Act of 1973. They are non-residential, consumer-driven, community-based disability organizations that promote independence and self-determination for people with disabilities. They're consumer-driven because the centers are required by federal law to have individuals with disabilities make up 51% or more of the staff. This requirement also applies to each CIL's board members. Our centers are staffed by people who have lived experience and can offer a familiarity with the challenges one endures when living with a disability. They're community-based because staff and board members live and work in the communities the CIL serves. Our CILs are funded through a mix of federal, state, and local dollars. Our CILs are true partners in every sense of the word. They work with state and federal agencies and departments, as well as other community organizations, to provide information, resources, support, and services to the disability community. The impact our organizations have on their communities is far-reaching. Because of this, our CILs also benefit from the generosity of local businesses and individuals who believe in our mission. Meyer, Steelcase, and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan are just some of the many companies who have been generous with their support. Federal funding makes up about 10 to 20% of a CIL's budget, depending on the needs of the communities they serve. Each of our centers are in create an emergency preparedness workbook focused on resources for individuals with disabilities, especially those most vulnerable in emergency situations like power outages, where life-sustaining equipment is compromised. CILs provide employment readiness training. This includes mock interviews, assistance with resume writing, information on workplace accommodations, and much more. Work in this area has a direct benefit to the local economies. People with jobs spend money, which leads to tax revenue. Our centers also serve as resources for local businesses who seek information on disability accommodations for their employees and their customers. Michigan CILs also serve as valuable resources for your offices. You may get calls asking for information about local supports for someone recently diagnosed with a disability or a parent whose child needs help navigating the educational system. You may get an email from someone whose loved one needs a ramp to access their home and cannot be released from the hospital without it. We have staff available to take those calls and walk someone through what sometimes can be a very overwhelming situation. We had a situation just this last summer where a woman had a stroke and her husband could not carry her. And in the 6 months, in the time that it took for them to contact someone and ask for help. A ramp was built. In that 6 months, she had not left her home. Her husband couldn't carry her. She had no access to the outside world for 6 months. I've highlighted only some of the many valuable resources, services, and supports Michigan CILs provide. I encourage all of you to spend time at your local center for independent living. You will see some of them have loan closets where mobility equipment like a walker or a wheelchair can be borrowed, or you may be able to observe an adaptive cooking class where someone can learn how to safely prepare a healthy meal in their home. I promise your time will be well spent, and you will leave feeling confident that your communities are being served well. Whether we are born with a disability, experience one due to illness or injury, or age into one, disability is part of the overall human experience. Each one of us is only an accident or a diagnosis away from having a disability. Whether it is temporary or permanent, a disability will change the way a person lives. A disability may change the way you communicate, the way you move around your home and community, or the way you perform your job. People with disabilities must overcome barriers that those without disabilities may never know exist. Some of us have helped our aging parents navigate new challenges, such as installing grab bars in the bathroom so they can shower safely. And some of us have helped our children navigate the challenges faced in our education system due to a disability. None of us are immune to the barriers that exist for individuals with disabilities. These barriers are not a them problem. They are an us problem. After listening to me and others today, I remain optimistic that all of you recognize the value in the services and support our organizations provide to some of our state's most vulnerable citizens. A threat of funding freezes cuts means a threat to the independence for the individuals we serve. People with disabilities want to work. They want to participate in their communities. They want to raise families. They want to shop at local businesses. They want to participate in our state's greatest recreational adventures. We are pure Michigan after all. Our centers work with individuals to empower them to do all of this and more. In addition to the funding centers receive through separate contracts with federal departments and agencies, between 10 and 20% of a center's overall budget comes from the federal government. Cuts to this general funding mean a decrease in overall services for people with disabilities. Staff layoffs are imminent. This means fewer people to provide services. Cuts will also lead to satellite offices needing to close, which means individuals with disabilities will need to travel further for assistance. In the Upper Peninsula specifically, where one CIL covers the entire UP, the ability for staff to travel to rural areas would cease, meaning people who need services wouldn't be able to receive them unless they were able to travel to the main office. By the way, transportation is one of the main barriers for people with disabilities. In the UP, much like other rural areas in our state, there is no public transit. One of the major impacts of reductions or elimination of funding is that people with disabilities will lose their voice. Our centers provide voices for them to advocate for their rights and to advocate for their right to live independently, and that voice will be extended.
It'll be very quick, Mr. Chairman. I guess, many of my counties in the UP have public transportation. So
In the rural areas?
yeah,
Okay. I apologize.
they use the Citizens Action or the Community Action Services. We have buses, so I guess I just want to clarify. Some of my counties have none, but many of them do.
Thank you for that.
My taxpayers want to make sure that you know that.
Thank you for that. I was informed by our center that that would be a major impact for them. Thank you.
Senator Pelkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you operate 15 centers for independent living for people, for veterans on having hard times, physical disability, cognitive disability. Everything you do is an example of inclusion, right? Including scooping up these people, including them into society.
Going to be Kelly Kuhn. Kelly's with the Michigan Nonprofit Association.
Good morning. My name is Kelly Kuhn, President and CEO of the Michigan Nonprofit Association. Founded in 1990, M&A is a 501c3 statewide membership organization that serves a large and diverse nonprofit sector through advocacy, services, and resources that support nonprofits to fulfill their mission. Thank you, Chairman Singh and the members of the committee. M&A is deeply concerned by continued efforts to withhold federal funding committed to nonprofits and businesses and government entities. The ongoing uncertainty caused by the federal administration's broad and arbitrary freeze on funding erodes longstanding public-private collaborations. Nonprofit organizations share with governments a commitment to improve lives and communities. As you've heard, millions of Michiganders rely on nonprofits to support their health, safety, and well-being, especially when challenges arise. You have heard from several of those today. During a time when more than 40% of households in Michigan struggle with the costs of the basics, the charitable sector's role in driving job creation and economic growth is indispensable and unmatched. By addressing well-documented and data-proven gaps that keep people from fully participating in work, school, and every facet of life, nonprofits bring communities together to ensure that every person has a fair wasn't too long ago that we witnessed firsthand the importance of the nonprofit sector when it responded to the immediate effects of the pandemic. While yes, there were some resources to support the work, the demand on nonprofits has not let up, and some continue to see a rise in the number of people requesting their services, especially again in the issues of areas of health and human services, housing, and other basic needs. About 30% of U.S. nonprofits receive funding from government, amounting to $303 billion each year. $6 billion in government grants. The recent report also estimates that 66% of nonprofits receiving from the federal government are at risk. Charitable nonprofits in Michigan number more than 41,000, and of those, 93% have revenues of less than $1 million. Nonprofits are vital to Michigan's economy, as nonprofits employ almost 11% of Michigan's workforce. They serve as anchor institutions in communities, both big and small, urban very tight budgets. Most do not have large amounts of operating capital, and we estimate that most cannot survive a freeze or a pause for more than 3 to 6 months. When the news broke about the freezes, we immediately heard from Head Start programs, meal programs for seniors, services that support immigrants, homeless shelters, veterans programs, more specifically those helping with housing and accessing veteran benefits such as health care, domestic violence shelters, human trafficking survivors, farmland and farming projects, and others that protect our natural resources, just to name a few. The administration's attempts to withhold disbursement of dollars already committed by the federal government have already led to the disruptions in lives of working families in Michigan. We strongly oppose such broad and arbitrary action that, without due process, contradicts acts of Congress and upends the lives of everyday Michiganders throughout the state. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. We have one last speaker, Richard Trent, Executive Director of Main Street Alliance, who's on Zoom.
Hi, Chairperson, members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Richard Trent. I'm here on behalf of Main Street Alliance and the 30,000 plus small business owners who have felt the very real and painful consequences of the Trump administration's reckless federal funding freeze. Small businesses are the backbone of our economy. They create jobs, they invest in our communities, and they drive when federal agencies stopped issuing payments, thousands of small businesses that depend on government contracts were thrown into crisis. And we, of course, saw this before in 2013 with the government shutdown, which cost small contractors millions of dollars in lost revenue and delayed projects and unpaid workers. The Trump administration's decision to freeze federal funds reopened that wound and forced many of the small firms that we work with to lay off employees and close their doors. Wendy Davis out of Utah, one of our members who sells tech products to government contractors and nonprofits, woke up the morning after the OMB memo was issued to find panicked emails, missed calls from clients that were worried that they weren't going to be able to move forward with her business. Corrine Hendrickson, who runs Little Explorers Family Childcare in New Glarus, Wisconsin, worried that frozen state block grant funds meant that she wasn't going to be able to make payroll for her childcare facility. And this testimony from our partners at Michigan United, at the very end of 2013, Michigan United established a legal department. That department helped somewhere around 1,000 people become U.S. citizens. In 2020, Michigan United joined another organization in a U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services CINAS grant, helping some 200 lawful permanent residents, mostly who had arrived as refugees from Iraq and Syria, apply for citizenship. In 2023, Michigan United applied for its own grant and was approved for a 2-year contract. And they've been busily working to help communities on both sides of the state become citizens. Then on February 4th, when the order was issued via the Department of Interior, actually, to freeze their funding, the funding of dozens of organizations across the country with the same type of grant, this funding is the legal department's single piece of this freeze was how it impacted the Small Business Administration. For small businesses, small business owners trying to start or expand, the SBA is a critical lifeline. But when federal funds were frozen, the SBA stopped processing new loans. This meant that entrepreneurs looking to access capital had nowhere to turn, except to big banks and predatory lenders charging much higher interest rates. The administration talks a big game about helping small businesses, but when it mattered most, it cut them off from the funding that they needed to survive. Most of the 30,000 plus small business owners in our national network rely on regular interfacing with SBA technical assistance or SBA associated loan products. I'll say that one other thing worth mentioning is research. We all know that innovation is the engine of economic growth in this country, and small businesses are responsible for some of the most important breakthroughs in health, technology, and manufacturing. But when federal R&D funding dried up, companies relying on grants from institutions like the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation were left stranded. Cutting off this funding didn't just hurt those businesses. It set back progress in industries critical to this country's future. This was the case for one of our members in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, who's working on groundbreaking research, who discovered the grant supporting her work was frozen. There are hundreds more of these cases of innovation interrupted because of this funding freeze decision. The freeze also stalled major infrastructure projects, leading to layoffs, and slowing economic development in communities across Michigan. Construction firms, local contractors, and suppliers all depend on the steady flow of federal funds to keep projects moving. And without it, those businesses suffered. And many communities were left with unfinished roads, bridges, and transit systems. So while the administration claimed that this freeze was about fiscal responsibility, The reality is that it created more costs down the line. States and local governments had to divert resources to deal with the fallout, straining already tight budgets. Even businesses with no direct ties to the federal government were impacted, which is something I feel like we don't always talk about enough, right? That we haven't talked about enough. Federal employees and contractors who were furloughed stopped spending. They cut back on eating out, canceled appointments. Is what it reveals about the administration's priorities. Small business owners who are already fighting uphill battles against corporate consolidation, rising costs, and tight labor markets were used as pawns in a political game. The administration's actions showed contempt for working families who depend on stable paychecks, access to capital, and functioning public infrastructure. At a time when small businesses needed certainty, they got chaos. At a time when communities needed stability, they got disruption. And for what? The administration's own numbers don't justify the hard flick that they've inflicted. Michigan's small business owners deserve better. They deserve a government that values their contributions instead of treating them like collateral damage. They deserve policies that provide stability and opportunity, not last-minute decisions that force them to operate in crisis mode. The next time an administration claims to stand with small businesses, we should remember what standing with them actually looks like. Not rhetoric, but real, consistent support. Because the success of Main Street should never be an afterthought. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Richard. I want to thank everybody who came out here to testify. Obviously, it was a difficult time and continues to be a difficult time. We will continue to take a look at how we can be helpful to organizations to handle and deal with the chaos that this has created, and as other things work their way through the process. So I want to thank everybody for coming out to testify. I know we have to get to the Senate floor for Senate action, and so I will adjourn this committee meeting.